A major concept of understanding ecosystems is that energy flows through ecosystems and that matter is recycled within them. So the energy that flows through the ecosystems first arrives from the sun. And when it first arrives, it's in a very high energy state, which means it can be used to do a lot of different things. So that energy that comes from the sun then hits the earth, and on Earth it transforms into different types of energy, and that energy can be used for the recycling of matter, so that that matter is available in fresh forms continuously to be utilised by the biosphere, which is all the living things on Earth, to be able to be incorporated into their tissues and to be able to kind of drive the recycling of the matter within it. The energy then leaves Earth, and it leaves as a lower energy state, which means in a state that is less able to do useful work. And that lower energy state is called heat, or infrared light. And that transformation of energy from a high energy state to a low energy state is called entropy, and it's the characteristic that governs any system where the energy entering into that system is always at a higher energy state than the energy leaving that system. And that drop in the usefulness of the energy, or the intensity of that energy, is like a fundamental property of the universe and physics, and it kind of explains how, as the universe expands, it cools down because it's losing useful energy. But the total amount of energy always stays the same, so even though it's at a lower energy state, it stays the same. So that energy that enters the Earth is then used for the recycling of matter. For life, some of the more important elements of matter are carbon and nitrogen and water and minerals. And we're going to explore some of these, particularly carbon and water, how they are recycled within a particular ecosystem. And on a global context, you can think of it as being the biosphere, the geosphere, the hydrosphere, the lithosphere. And each one of these spheres represents a certain collection of properties on Earth. So the biosphere is all the living things, the geosphere is the, often called the lithosphere, or the geosphere is the Earth. The hydrosphere is all the water, and the atmosphere too is the other one. So each one of these elements is being recycled between each one, and we'll investigate how that happens for the carbon and water cycle. But the recycling of that matter ensures that the biosphere, all the living things, always have that matter in a fresh form. So carbon's like a classic one, and in the carbon cycle, you've got an input of this carbon from the living things in the system. So you got the trees, you got the shrubs, you got the animals in that system, and each one of these living things is made out of carbon. They're all hydrocarbon-based life forms, and each one of them puts carbon into the soil as part of its life cycle. So the trees drop wood and bark and leaves, animals eat the plants and produce manures, animals and plants die, and all of that results in an input of carbon into the soil, and as that carbon's broken down by scavengers and decomposes, it enters into the soil as humus. And that humus can, over thousands of years, be stored long term as coal, oil and gas, or the humus can be a food source to support the food web that's in the soil, which provides those nutrients back to the living things, such as plants that draw those nutrients out of the soil. And then you've got carbon dioxide coming out of the atmosphere and being used by plants in photosynthesis, and then you've got carbon dioxide being released by plants and animals in respiration to produce energy, going back into the atmosphere, and you've got carbon dioxide also diffusing into the water and diffusing out of the water back into the atmosphere, and then you've got people too extracting coal, oil and gas and putting that back into the atmosphere as they burn it. So this movement of carbon ensures that the carbon that is needed by life is always made available in fresh forms to support life. And one of the interesting things with the biosphere is it actually regulates the cycling of all these minerals and the conditions on Earth. So the degree to which nitrogen and carbon and water and minerals are recycled on Earth is maintained at nice consistent levels to support life by the very function of the living things. So even minerals, which might seem quite inert, are being mined by bacteria and fungi and taken out of the subsoil and being made available to the plants that then incorporate them into their tissues, and as they die and decompose, return those minerals back to the soil again. So if it wasn't for the function of the biosphere, a lot of the things like minerals would just lie inert within the soil and wouldn't be recycled within the different spheres. So the biosphere actually acts to terraform the planet, you can think of. So terraforming is changing the conditions of a planet, and life does that to all of the different matter that's on Earth. So when you think of the atmosphere and you think of the water, when you think of the minerals, whatever you look at, each one of those elements is maintained at nice consistent levels by the very function of life. Even things like the temperature on Earth is regulated by the life on Earth. So it acts as a stabilizing mechanism to ensure that the availability and the conditions of the different elements on Earth are maintained at nice consistent levels to support further life.